89 years old Apollo astronaut Charles Duke is finally breaking his silence about what he witnessed on the moon, and it's not the story you've heard before. His place in history is unlike anyone else's. Before his own boots ever touched lunar dust, Duke's voice was already etched into one of humanity's greatest moments. From Mission Control in Houston, millions heard him speak with his steady southern drawl as he guided Neil Armstrong during Apollo 11's first descent. When Armstrong's words, "The Eagle has landed," echoed across the globe, it was Duke who answered, "Roger, tranquility, we copy you on the ground." That single reply made him part of history before his own journey even began. Yet, he was not the one receiving parades or planting a flag. He was the invisible astronaut, the calm voice in the background, watching giants take steps he longed to take himself. But fate would eventually grant him that chance, and his story is more complex than the headlines suggest. Charles Duke lived with a strange dual identity that set him apart from the other Apollo astronauts. Before he ever stepped onto the moon, he was already part of history as the voice who carried Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin through their most dangerous descent. Every word he spoke was filtered through the pressure of millions of listeners, every pause amplified. Yet he was not there in person, only the guardian on the ground. That role left a lasting mark. He once described it as watching children take their first steps, proud, protective, but deeply yearning to experience it himself. Years later, when Apollo 16 finally gave him the chance, he carried both perspectives with him, the earthbound communicator and the lunar explorer. Unlike Armstrong or Collins, Duke experienced the Apollo program from both sides of the glass. He knew what it meant to steady trembling voices from Houston, and he knew what it felt like to hear his own voice echoing inside a helmet on alien soil. That double vision gave him insights no one else could claim. When Charles Duke finally stepped off the lunar module in April 1972, he carried years of training and countless simulations in his mind. He expected to see exactly what the textbooks had promised: a barren plain of gray dust, jagged rocks, and endless silence. But the reality was far more jarring. Nothing could have prepared him for the overwhelming contrast between expectation and truth. The ground felt at once familiar and alien, a stage he had rehearsed in Houston but now stripped of safety nets. His boots pressed into dust finer than talcum powder, clinging to every seam of his suit, marking each step like an indelible signature. The silence was heavier than he imagined, not just the absence of sound but a void pressing against his thoughts. Even the way light struck the surface seemed wrong, too sharp, too absolute. Duke later admitted that no simulation ever captured that feeling, that the moment he arrived, he realized the moon was not what he thought it would be. It was something stranger, harsher, and far more profound. If this journey into the mystery of the moon's alleged ruins has sparked your imagination, don't stop here. Hit the like button if you enjoyed diving into these theories, and subscribe so you don't miss the next big mystery we uncover together. What struck Duke most was not the ground beneath his boots, but the sky above, or rather, the absence of it. On Earth, even the darkest night is softened by starlight, haze, or the faint glow of atmosphere. On the moon, all of that was gone. Above his helmet stretched a blackness so absolute it felt like falling into nothing. Against that void, the surface was almost blinding, every rock and shadow carved with unnatural sharpness. Photographs never captured it, because no camera could balance such extremes. To Duke's eyes, it was staggering, a world without gradients, only raw light and void. Even the Earth, the blue marble so familiar in iconic images, was hidden from view. From Apollo 16's landing site, it hung directly overhead, blocked by the rigid helmet that confined his vision. He later admitted that the most poetic image in popular memory, the Earthrise, never existed for him. Instead, his world was a narrow window, a fishbowl of glass and metal that limited his gaze, reminding him that survival depended on confinement as much as exploration. For Duke, the moon was not beautiful in a gentle or familiar way. It was beautiful in a way that unsettled him, a landscape of extremes where shadows cut like knives and the silence pressed into his bones. He later said the surface felt alien, not another desert or mountaintop, but a place utterly indifferent to human life. This terrifying beauty stayed with him for decades. And yet, when people asked if walking on the moon changed his life, Duke surprised them. He told them it wasn't the lunar dust or the black sky that transformed him, but something deeper. The moon showed him the limits of human achievement. but his faith gave him meaning. That perspective made him unique among astronauts. His story was not only about exploration, but about the inner journey sparked by facing a world so stark and unforgiving. It reminded him, and us, that space is not just a frontier of science, but also a mirror reflecting who we are and what we choose to believe. Apollo 16 was not just another footprint mission. While the world remembers Apollo 11 for the first step, Charles Duke insists that his own mission changed lunar science in ways few people recall. He and Commander John Young spent nearly 3 full days on the surface, driving the lunar rover across rugged terrain, drilling cores, and collecting over 200 pounds of samples. Those rocks, some of the most geologically diverse ever returned, are still being studied in laboratories today. But perhaps the most overlooked achievement was the first telescope ever set up on the moon. Unlike Earth-based observatories, this far ultraviolet instrument operated without atmosphere or distortion, opening a window to the stars that no ground telescope could match. Alongside it, Apollo 16 carried X-ray and gamma-ray spectrometers, mapping elements hidden beneath the surface and reshaping theories of how the moon was formed. For Duke, these were the true milestones, the quiet triumphs buried beneath the glamour of flags, footprints, and photographs. For all its science, Apollo 16 was also deeply human. Between drilling cores and hauling rock samples, Duke and Young found brief moments to lighten the crushing tension. They called it the Lunar Olympics. In the low gravity, every step already felt like a small leap, so they pushed the limits. Duke tried to hop like a high jumper, soaring higher than he expected. For a moment, he felt weightless, almost playful, until he came crashing down. The fall sent him sprawling backward, dangerously close to smashing the life support pack on his back. He later admitted it could have been fatal, a single accident that would have ended the mission in silence. But he laughed it off in the moment, grateful the suit had held. That mix of danger and humor defined their days on the moon. Even in lighter moments, Duke never forgot the stakes. Every experiment, every drive of the rover, every sample bag carried the weight of history. Yet for a heartbeat, they were not just astronauts. They were men discovering how fragile and absurd it felt to play on another world. In his later years, Duke found himself facing a new and frustrating challenge. People who flatly denied the moon landings ever happened. At public events, strangers would confront him with claims of hoaxes and staged photographs. Instead of anger, Duke met them with calm authority. "Sir, I was there," he would reply, his words carrying the weight of both Houston and the lunar surface. He described the 1/6 gravity that turned every step into a controlled leap, the unbearable heat of the sun pressing against his suit, and the bone-deep silence when he cut his comms. He pointed to the hundreds of pounds of moon rocks still sitting in laboratories around the world, undeniable evidence no conspiracy could replicate. What set him apart was his dual perspective, both the Capcom who guided Apollo 11 and the astronaut who later bounded across the lunar highlands. That combination made him untouchable in debate. For Duke, defending Apollo was not just about history. It was about protecting the sacrifice and courage of those who risked everything for humanity's greatest leap. Duke knows the clock is ticking. Of the 12 men who walked on the moon, only a few are still alive, and he is one of them. That reality sharpens his purpose. In recent years, he has stepped out of the quiet, visiting classrooms and museums, telling young people that Apollo was never the finish line, but a beginning. He describes the stillness, the harsh light, the fragile blue earth, and then he points forward. Artemis, he says, is the promise renewed. A return to the moon, not as a destination, but as a proving ground. Build outposts, learn to live off-world. Turn the lunar surface into a launch pad. From there, aim for Mars. He wants his grandchildren to watch those rockets rise and understand the unbroken thread from Houston's headsets to his dusty boot prints and onward to new worlds. Memory becomes mission. If the next generation takes that baton, then his voice, his footprints, and his warning against forgetting will have done their work. The moon was the prologue. The real story is what we choose to write next. Do you believe humanity should return to the moon to finish what Apollo started, or skip ahead and aim directly for Mars?